Greetings and welcome to Zord's Planetary Space Program episode 13. The time has finally come. This is my Eve Ascension ship and I'm going to launch it into orbit. Take a good look, because this is the ugliest ship I have ever built. This ship is simultaneously the least well designed, the least good, least pretty ship I have ever made, and is simultaneously one of the best ships I have ever made, because it can get into Eve orbit from the surface, which is hard. Trust me. And this first launch, when I'm getting from Kerbin surface to Kerbin orbit, I'm gonna do the flight without releasing any stages, which is why I had drop tanks. And this right here is not part of the flight plan, just to make sure you understand that. And I'm not dropping any stages, which of course increases the load the ship has to carry and decreases the delta V, and most of all it has a severe impact on the thrust to weight ratio, because the first stage tanks and engines are very heavy even when they're empty. But despite carrying lots of dead weight and doing a backflip on the way up, this thing makes it into orbit, even if it doesn't have a lot of fuel left. It has a capacity for something like 10,000 units of liquid fuel and oxidizer to match, and when it gets up it has a few hundred left. But it does get up, even if the last part of the burn is done with just one engine still running. And you will see by my very poor timing of the launch window that I'm not actually going to Alpha Station with this one. This is because if I were going to Alpha Station, the game would lag so bad and I have to refuel it. But Alpha Station doesn't have the capacity to refuel this ship, so I would have to bring up fuel tankers anyway. So a easier and quicker solution is to send this ship up on its own and then send up fuel tankers directly to the ship. And here is the first of these fuel tankers. You'll notice it has a thing on the top, which is part adapter and part service module for our Eve Ascension ship. Because the Eve Ascension ship only has one of the small or regular size docking ports, and I'm using the big docking ports as the standard. So this one is adapter, and it also contains RCS and lights and a few other good to have things. It has a reaction wheel, for example, so you can turn the heavy ship without burning RCS fuel like crazy. So we are bringing in our otherwise regular tanker to dock, and this is not much of a problem. If I were going to do this at a space station, the part count would probably be over 1,000 for the ship and station, and then bringing in a tanker to dock there would be a painful experience. And this ship has a lot of tanks, a lot of small tanks, which need to be refueled individually. So I was sitting doing this for a while. With a free camera, the ship rotates on its own under the camera, so you don't have to rotate the camera to see all the tanks, which was very cinematic. And we empty our tanker completely of fuel. There's 0 units left, and we deorbit it using RCS. And because the capacity of the Eve ship is, as I said, 10,000 units, which equals somewhere around 3.5 orange fuel tanks, we have to send up 2 ships. Surprisingly, despite the rather high part count, the lag is completely manageable. The time counter is in yellow, but it's not worse than just hanging around Alpha Station. And this, I believe, is because there's no extra things, or I'm quite sure it's because we don't have any other things loaded in the flight scene. If I had been at Alpha Station, it would have been so hard. Fourth ship we are launching today is this pusher, which is a slightly modified, you can call it a Mark II pusher, but it's not, it doesn't have the same mission profile as the pushers. It launches in pretty much the same way. The only difference is slightly bigger SRBs, slightly bigger boosters, because it has 4 nuclear engines, which makes it a bit heavier, and it also has twice the amount of RCS tanks, which is still a low amount compared to fuel. So I send the pusher up to the Eve Ascension ship with its docked fuel tanker, and I dock the pusher to the back of the fuel tanker and use the fuel that's left in the tanker to refuel the pusher, because it uses almost all of its fuel on its way up. And then I undock everything from everything else, and the fuel tanker, which should be empty now, it will be deorbited, except I forgot a tiny amount of fuel in one of the nacelles, so I redock it. Good thing I discovered that, otherwise we would have wasted like 80 units of fuel. Unacceptable. So I redock it, empty it, good, because the Eve Ascension ship is not quite full. It's missing, well, how much can it be? A couple of hundred units. But that's okay. Fuel is cheap in Kerbin orbit, but it isn't impossible to get outside of Kerbin orbit. So here we have our interplanetary ship, which is the Eve Ascension ship almost fully fueled with an interplanetary pusher, which is the only difference is slightly more RCS, slightly higher thrust to weight ratio. And this thing is, well, of course, first is going to go out to Minmus as a preparation for the big interplanetary jumps to save fuel. Because, as I said, fuel is cheap in Kerbin orbit. It's quite cheap in Minmus orbit, and it is quite expensive outside of that. So we plan our node, and this thing turns without use of RCS because it has 2 reaction wheels in it. It's quite good that only 2 reaction wheels makes it this nimble. You know, it's several hundred tons of spacecraft, and it still turns quite well. Of course, the winglets don't do anything. And here we discover our first design flaw. Since the Eve Ascender only has the regular size docking ports, this thing is springy and flexible when under power flight. This means I don't want to push it too hard. I don't want to have full thrust all the way. And this means that because we are going with lower engine power and we are going low thrust to weight ratio as it is, we're gonna have to do a multi-burn. Yeah, we're gonna do a multi-burn to get to Minmus. So we're gonna do several burns over several orbits, and the initial plan here is 2 orbits with half the burn on each, but running on 75% power. But we can actually nudge it up slowly if we are careful to about 100%. We actually get like, well, yeah, you see how much acceleration we get. Not much, but I see ship with lower acceleration. It turns out we needed 3 orbits to get this out to Minmus. And here it's slightly more convenient because we don't have to detach the pusher, because the pusher isn't based on Alpha Station. It's going to follow this ship pretty much all the way. And unless we forget, we actually have other ships orbiting and that needs to be paid attention to. This thing, which messed up its encounter somehow, maybe the game bugged out. I'm not going to investigate too closely because it might cause more bugs. It's doing its maneuver to get into to get it into a Minmus encounter. Anyway, back to the Eve ship. We used almost the entire orange fuel tank from the pusher to do the injection into Minmus, out to Minmus. So we used almost the entire fuel tank. We have a couple of hundred units left, and we're gonna use some of them to adjust our encounters and to get into unstable orbit. We are of course going to refuel the pusher on the way, well, when we get to Minmus. We are not going to dock at Beta Station either, because Beta Station is even more laggy than Alpha Station. So we're gonna solve this some other way. But first we need to get into Minimus orbit. And we are actually going towards Beta Station, if not we're going to the actual station. But we're setting up our encounters, so we're actually gonna have an encounter with Beta Station. So we execute another maneuver node of a couple of meters per second, and this uses up almost all of the fuel we have left in the pusher. If we were to run out, we could just refuel, steal some of the fuel from the actual ship, but you don't want to have to do that. We are going to refuel this thing again if we need to when we get to Eve, because we're going to have a space station set up there. And we have adjusted our encounter, and now the alarm tells us to pay attention to the next ship, which is the Duna lander. And we're gonna this one is actually going to Beta Station. So we set up the encounter, and now it's this one we have to pay attention to. An inclination change of just a couple of meters per second. You can of course use the RCS fuel on this craft to make it rotate quicker, and there's really no reason to not use RCS, because the lander and ascender doesn't use RCS. It doesn't even have RCS tanks on it, because that would just be useless weight. And you see here we're coming into the encounter, but I'm going to zero out the velocities before we get below 2.5 kilometers, preferably a bit more, like 5, but whoop, yeah, very springy. So now we are zeroed out and transferring some of the RCS, because we can refuel the RCS fuel too if we wanted to. That's really a minor thing. So here we leave the ascender and detach or undock our interplanetary pusher, which on its own flies out to Beta Station, or flies over. It's quite close. You can effectively do the point and burn technique around Minimus, because the orbital velocity is so low. Yeah, you notice the lag here. It's very, very bad. I think we got out of range from the ascender. The ascender itself is, as I said, 400 parts or something, and Beta Station is, I think, 800 parts. So having both of these loaded in the same flight scene is torture for me and the computer. Fortunately, we don't have to do that all the time, especially not during docking. So we refuel the pusher. It's now chock full of fuel and RCS, which is good. So we just turn it around and fly back to the waiting ascender. Of course, using some of the fuel we just went into so much trouble getting to get there. But the goal here is not to have 100% fuel. The goal here is to have enough fuel to get into Eve orbit, and from there we can refuel again, because the other things that are docked to Beta Station is going to become space station around Eve. But until it's time to send the crafts to do another wave of launches, we are going to wait in a slightly higher orbit compared to Beta Station. So we're docked, we are refueled as much as we need to. Now all we have to do is wait. But we are not done for today, because the Dress lander is still on its way, and we have to do its capture burn and combined rendezvous burn for Beta Station. This thing has tons of fuel. It's a fuel tanker attached to it. So we just tweak the encounter and time warp, because there's nothing else to do. This is the last thing that we're sending, except for the crew itself, which is going to arrive in the next episode. course going to be launched in the next episode. And this is currently time warped, and you saw that there's a slight glitch between the footage running smooth and then it's running smooth again, because this that you're seeing now is accelerated to 8 times time acceleration, because this is the worst. I mean, the lag here is bad. And now that we have docked our ship, we can see that the part count is 1132. I think that's a record for me. That's all we have time for today, so I'll see you next time. Bye!